Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're reacting to Donald Trump's announcement that on day one of his presidency, he will scrap the free trade deal that took a decade to flesh out between Pacific nations, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP as it's known. We're talking about it in the company of Mireya Solis, Japan Studies Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institute, Ralph Winnie, China Director at the Eurasian Business Coalition, both of them in Washington. Welcome back from London. Linda Louet, who teaches at the London Business School. And here in the studio, André Lozakrug-Pietri, the founder of A Capital Venture Group, venture capital investment firm, which you split your time between Beijing and Paris. And something André mentioned before the break was how this plays into China's hands. Russia's president, that APEC summit in Peru that ended Monday, ruining trade deals that exclude other nations. His Chinese counterpart, more than talking up, though, his answer to TPP, the one that Mireya Solis mentioned in part one of our discussion, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
China wants to participate actively in trade agreements, investments, and development in the Asia-Pacific region. We have to get involved in the cooperation network, take advantage of the development between China and Latin America to propel the global economy towards robust, sustained, and inclusive growth.
Linda Hui, did you expect we'd be in a situation now where it's China talking about free trade deals and the United States backing out of them?
Yes, I think that was probably quite expected, given that the TPP was originally sold by President Obama as a way of ensuring American influence in the Asia-Pacific, whereas he said if TPP wasn't passed, then China would be the dominant force in the region, because TPP does exclude China. And so the fact that the day after President-elect Trump was declared the winner of the American election, China immediately said that they would, in Peru at the APEC summit, launch a discussion to try and get a free trade agreement of the Asia-Pacific in order to essentially supplant the TPP. And Peru, their host, which is a member of the TPP, has asked to sign up to this new free trade area under China. And I think if you look at how much China has benefited from trade, it's not surprising they're taking the lead, especially since if you are going to work with a Chinese-led free trade area, any country which is the hub in a hub-and-spoke trade arrangement tends to be able to set the terms more, just like in the same way when America leads free trade agreements, it tend to get to set more of the terms that it wants to have within a trade agreement. So generally speaking, China taking this initiative is a way of essentially saying if America isn't going to be moving towards free trade, then other countries which have benefited a lot from free trade, especially developing countries, should be looking to Beijing for new leadership. But let's not, as I say, overlook the fact that a free trade deal set by China is likely to be very different than that set by America. And
very different
we should
on what?
expect
For
different
instance,
tenure.
let's give a specific example here. I know that, for instance, intellectual property, there's always the argument about, piracy and people stealing patents and this kind of thing. Are you suggesting that that would be very different, for instance?
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is that China is a middle-income country. It has a very large manufacturing sector. It's hoping to develop and protect up until 2025, in fact, is the latest plan. America is a predominantly services-based economy. It's very interested in things like standards, for instance, leveling the playing field, getting its services into overseas markets. So from that perspective, a free trade deal which is led by a middle-income country is going to be different than one which is led by America, which is a rich country, a developed country, they have different goals. And so I would say that the contours of those will be different. In terms of a lot of these free trade deals, they are working off the basis of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which China joined in 2001. And within it is an IPR provision, which was, of course, set to American standards. And China has had a very difficult time in meeting that standard. But I think that's the baseline. All of these regional free trade agreements build upon what the WTO is already. So I think the problems that China has had there, I don't think wouldn't necessarily be a focal point in going forward. In fact, generally speaking, regulations and laws are very difficult to do in trade agreements. Trade agreements are still at their base about opening up markets, mostly manufactured goods, but now increasingly services as well as investment. And if we look at countries, especially in the Asia-Pacific, agriculture is another big issue. It's one of the reasons why Japan struggled, for instance, with TPP, as well as other nations.
André Lozakrug-Pietri, the Chinese, you heard Linda describe them, a middle-income country, but it's an economy that's changing fast. How do you see a China-run free trade deal?
Well, I think what has been said is correct, is that, and that is really probably the big mistake made by President-elect, is to think that when you're not in the middle of these agreements, you can influence them and make better bilateral deals. You end up negotiating with a lot of people, smaller people, instead of setting standards. I think a China-led agreement will be probably much more focused on exports, and increasingly the topic of investments will be important, because in a country that is catching up, like the Chinese economy, the topic of make or buy, that means either you develop yourself with your own innovation or you buy it outside, is increasingly important. I mean, what we should not overlook, which is good news for, I would say, Europe or the US, is that China is less and less competitive from the pure cost aspect. So you see the returns on equity on manufacturing companies, either they are in overcapacity status or they are less competitive than they were 10 years ago. So the topic of investing overseas will be absolutely central to some agreements which might be led by China. And the second thing is, when you have such a big hub, which is kind of the center of a lot of supply chains in the world, negotiating, I think it's going to be very, very challenging for smaller manufacturing or smaller emerging countries to kind of have anything to say on the table. So I don't think it's good news for a lot of people what's going on right now.
You don't think it's good news? Ralph Winnie, your reaction?
I'm not surprised that China is trying to take the lead in creating a new free trade agreement. I think if you look at their involvement in promotion of the One Belt, One Road initiative, the Silk Road initiative, as a way to link East versus West, this is certainly not a surprising development. I do think that they have many domestic challenges. Certainly as Trump begins his engagement with the president of China, one of the areas that he is going to really push is labeling China as a currency manipulator. That's one of his stances that he's thinking that he's going to take against the Chinese.
So more a stance of defiance rather than one of trying to cut a deal, because up to now we've had trade deals where neither side wants the other one in the tent.
I think it's going to come down to protecting the American worker, protecting jobs in the United States, and if he's thinking he can use that as leverage for negotiations, where China will come around and will work as an equal partner with the United States, or at least that's how he perceives China having to work as an equal partner, then I think you'll see a very interesting dynamic in the relationship. People forget that Trump has done extensive business in China. So he's already proved himself in the minds of many of the Chinese people that he can get things done, that he's a successful businessman. So that buys him a lot of clout with people in government. In China, the government and the business are all as one, even though you have government run and you have private companies. In effect, the government is still involved in your everyday business life.
Let me bring in Maria Solis on this. Maria, does that reassure you, the fact that Donald Trump has done business in China?
Well, I don't find it's enough. I think that trade agreements are not just, business deals. They're about governance increasingly. We know that we have a very different world economy today. Again, the traditional model where you think that countries manufacture whole goods and then export them to another, that's not the center of trade anymore. Again, it's in services, in components, in machinery, and we need rules that address issues behind the border. And I have not seen anything yet that gives me an indication that the Trump administration is interested, as someone else mentioned in your panel, on standard setting and to cover large numbers of markets. So I am not sure that we should be thinking that expertise in cutting deals that work at the, in real estate and so forth is what we need when we're talking about interstate negotiations that have economic consequences for the macroeconomy, but they're also central elements of our foreign policy.
All right, TPP is dead, and the North American Free Trade Agreement could be under threat. In a front-page article, the Wall Street Journal, quoting advisors who say Donald Trump won't scrap NAFTA, as it's called, entirely, but perhaps try to impose tariffs and taxes on U.S. firms that move business south of the border to Mexico, which has a widening trade surplus with the United States, but with a much smaller economy. The latter is much more dependent on bilateral trade. Let me ask you, Mireya, is that realistic? Will there be taxes on U.S. firms that move their business to Mexico?
It's hard to know exactly what he will actually deliver on. We heard a lot in the campaign. We don't know exactly what measures he will implement. Part of this uncertainty has to do with the fact that he has not yet, we don't have yet the full lineup of economic appointments coming up in his administration. Obviously, we have some idea of who has been advising him and what they think, but we don't have yet those appointments confirmed. Could he move towards something like that? He could indeed. Would that be to the benefit of us as an economy, as an American workers? I am not sure. And this goes to a broader point, I think, that this intense focus on trade is taking away attention from what I think is the larger factor behind what's going on in American manufacturing. There has indeed been a major loss of manufacturing jobs during the 2000s. But 85% of those job losses had to do with automation, with technological change. And that's going to continue unabated. And unless we go and address that kind of safety net that will allow workers to navigate a faster pace of economic transition, where low-skilled workers are going to have a very difficult time finding a new place in the new economy, we're not going to actually be addressing the real issues to prepare ourselves for what's coming ahead, given the current technological trends.
André Lezecourt-Pietri, we're heading towards a presidential election in this country where populists are complaining also about outsourcing and jobs lost with multinationals moving their business abroad to lower paid workers. What's your reaction to what you just heard from Mireya?
Well, look, as I said at the beginning of the debate, I think Trump has is asking the right questions and bringing probably the wrong answers. The right question is, how do you address all this section of the population which absolutely rightly, and I think the business elite, the political elite just needs to understand that a whole set of the population has not been a winner of the 15 years of globalization. 15 years, I mean, it's just the 15th anniversary that China joined the WTO. And I think on a macro level, again, a country like China has benefited massively. On a macro level, the whole world has benefited. But you see a whole set of people which did not have the right skills to go on the trend, and probably it's going to accelerate. But let me just say one thing about Trump, because I think there is a little bit this feeling, I hear that a lot here in Paris or in Berlin, that he's not having the right policies. I think actually this is not done, it's done at a very right time, because what we should not forget is that the US is getting competitive again because of low energy prices, because emerging markets are getting expensive, because when you're automatizing, the cost of a robot is the same in Mexico, in China, or in the US. So the proportion of labor cost is actually reducing in our modern economies. So it's actually a right time to kind of reshore. We were talking about offshoring a lot, or delocalization. Today you see a lot of companies, for business reasons, who bring production closer to home. I mean, I heard that, for example, Apple is thinking about bringing part of its iPhone production back to the US. I don't know if they will do that. But I think he's not navigating against the wave. He's doing that to talk to his electorate, obviously, but he knows very clearly that it's not going to hurt the American economy that much. And look, and if he gets shale and coal again on the stream, it's terrible for the planet on the long term, but on the short term, it will make America very competitive.
All right, let me turn to Linda Huet, who's speaking to us, by the way, from the land of Brexit. Linda, what's your reaction to what you just heard from André?
No, I think there is a trend of reshoring. We have certainly seen that in parts of American manufacturing, and I think there is. I agree that President-elect Trump is certainly going with what quite a lot of American workers would like to see, jobs coming back. And I suppose the other thing to say is it's also the case that people are now living longer, and we had always thought as economists that it's very difficult to retrain workers and reskill workers, and I think that is still largely true. But there's also evidence that that's also improving. So in other words, the American economy has always been fairly competitive and may well remain, become even more competitive. However, that doesn't change the fact that globally trade is not free. So if President-elect Trump, for instance, wants American manufacturing to remain in America and not allow them to build, say, a factory in Mexico, there will be an impact in terms of production, in terms of growth. So just give you an example. When GM builds a factory in Mexico, it can sell into the EU tariff-free its cars because they have a free trade agreement. When American cars get manufactured and sold to the EU, there's a 10% tariff. So we're not talking about things which would kill off growth, but we are talking over time. All of this would be compounded. And at a time when there is concern over the longer-term growth prospects of the U.S. economy, I think we just have to bear in mind that you're adding on frictions and costs. And so for President-elect Trump, I think he needs to balance better what happens with essentially not actively pursuing trade deals, in fact, coming out of them. And he does have the power to do that. Because remember, in the United States, the president can renegotiate and withdraw from free trade agreements, as well as impose tariffs with delegated authority from Congress. But you need Congress's approval to approve a trade deal. So he can come out of them faster than he gets into them. And you could be looking at a period in which America comes out of trade agreements which could actually have an impact on its growth. And I would say over the longer term, we'll see what happens. But I come back to my earlier point, which is he's clearly concerned about American wages and American jobs. And I think there are ways to deal with that, including, as I said, retraining, reskilling, rather than putting everything on having a trade agreement which can address distribution effects, which is very unlikely, even in the most complicated trade deal. And believe me, even simple trade deals are complicated enough already.
All right, the election of Donald Trump, by the way, follows the rise of other Pacific Rim nationalists. The one who's made the most headlines of late is the new president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, a man with a swagger who has shrugged off U.S. concerns about human rights. He's cozied up to China to try to settle differences they have over fishing rights. And before flying to the APEC summit, almost seemed to be saying that he and the next U.S. president speak the same lingo.
Donald Trump, congratulations. It was a well-deserved victory. I trust in his judgment and that he would be fair and treat in the matter of the treatment of illegal immigrants.
Ralph Winnie, are they peas in the same pod, Rodrigo Duterte and Donald Trump?
Well, I think Donald Trump is going to be able to engage with Duarte. How that relationship develops, I think, remains to be seen. But certainly Duarte has a respect for Donald Trump that he did not have for President Obama. And if that can start a positive dialogue that can bring the Philippines back into the U.S. fold, I'm all for it. I think how Donald Trump engages with world leaders is going to be key over the next few months. That's why I think China, Japan, France, and Germany, those are going to be key relationships that the Trump administration is going to have to develop in a very positive way.
All right, Mireya Solis, because we're almost out of time. Do you agree that Donald Trump is someone that leaders in the Pacific area will respect more, perhaps, than Barack Obama?
I don't think we can make that judgment, and I don't think we should emphasize chemistry. It's important, but there are broader geostrategic elements at stake. And you heard Duterte being very complimentary of Mr. Trump, but he also visited China recently, and people talking about a real rapprochement between Philippines and China. So you cannot say that just changing the personality will change the entire contours of the relationship either.
All right, I want to thank you, Mireya Solis, for joining us from Washington. I thank as well Ralph Winnie for being with us from the U.S. Capitol, Linda Hui in London, and André Loza-Krug Pietri here in Paris. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. This plan to drop the TPP trade deal on day one by Donald Trump, of course, that's garnering a lot of reactions.
Yes, it doesn't seem to have surprised that many people, to be fair. It's almost as though everyone is expecting this TPP deal to unravel. What they might not have expected was for it to be a first day in office priority for the new US president. Taking a look at the Australian version of the Huffington Post, they had a very dramatic headline on this one. Trump kills the world's biggest trade deal, they say. But they point out that the Australian Prime Minister still retains some optimism that TPP will yet be saved. Malcolm Turnbull said only time will tell if the US Congress will engage with the TPP. According to the Huffington Post, they say that Labour's trade spokesman was much less positive. He had to say that on this issue that the gig is up for TPP. Looking at the Japan Times, this is their take on the story. You've got then trade and globalization blasting through the walls of communism, and now we have many more barriers being set up. Looking at what they had to say in their articles, this particular piece favours the idea that the end of TPP is not the end of the world. It will slow growth, they say, but that was going to happen anyway, a reflection of China's slowdown. So should we worry that trade is growing more slowly, they ask? Yes, but only in the sense that a doctor is worried if a patient has a fever. A fever is rarely life-threatening.
So hold on. The story saying, let's not hit the panic button, but the headline says globalization's last gasp. Your reaction to that, André?
Well, I think really multilateralism and globalization is really a threat right now. And the whole concept of solving problems all together, which was an idea probably since the end of the Second World War, is going back. I mean, we always had this idea that progress goes only one way. We can see in this current circumstances that nothing is granted for sure.
Well, one person who may have had the solution all along is New Zealand's Prime Minister, John Key, who said that everything could have been saved if we just changed the name to the Trump-Pacific Partnership. He said we should have appealed to the president-elect's vanity. It is something that I think we suspect he does suffer from. Yes, there's a headline here from The Independent. He suggested cosmetic changes could have actually changed the outcome of these deals.
Oh, maybe it's not too late.
Maybe.
All right. It's not just what people are saying, it's also how they say it.
Yes, exactly. Donald Trump made this announcement with a video on YouTube, and that is something that a lot of people are choosing to focus on right now. This tweet is typical. Whoa, this has just landed. President-elect Trump completely bypasses the media, goes straight to YouTube. Because, of course, ordinarily you might expect a press conference, a press release, all these kinds of things that we're used to when we're dealing with...
I know where this is going.
Exactly. So that is something that people have picked up on. wondering if this is the shape of things to come from the Trump administration, if you like. Even Cosmopolitan magazine is taking note of this one. You might think it's just about gossip and headlines, but they're actually getting very political right now. The number of political stories on their website is really quite surprising. And what they point out is that after dodging the press for 2 weeks, Donald Trump releases his first video address because he's been dumping his press entourage that should be following his every move, and he isn't keen on being criticised by the press. And presumably that is what this is all about, a pre-recorded video. No one can ask him any questions. He can't get himself into any bother by ad-libbing either. And as Cosmo points out, he is yet to hold a single news conference since he was elected. Now, the New York Post is talking about the fact that the only gathering he's had with the media since being elected happened yesterday. It was an off-the-record gathering. And instead of it being about journalists asking questions, getting information from the president-elect, it turned into them being given a roasting by Donald Trump. As they put it here, Donald Trump's media summit was a firing squad. So very, very strong words indeed coming out of this. This meeting was a total disaster, according to one source. The TV executives and anchors went in there thinking they would be discussing the access that they would get to the Trump administration, but instead they got a Trump-style dressing down. Now, the New Yorker goes into great detail on this one too, saying the fantasy of the normalization of Donald Trump is blown out of the water, an illusion shattered.
All right, New York Post, New Yorker, two very different views of the U.S. president-elect. Many thanks for that, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.